In 1980, David Bowie, long considered ahead of his time throughout the 70s, synchronized with the times with the new romantic release Scary Monsters and Super Creeps, and from that album, the track Because You're Young. Pete Townshend. I like that circular figure. Pete Townshend had a good feel for this track. Much better than what he was able to do for some of John Entwistle's material on the Face Dances album. Now, Bowie is really finding some great vocal nuances within these bars. Psychodelic girl, I like that portmanteau, psychedelic and delicate. Come out to play, little metal-faced boy, don't stay away.
Little metal-faced boy, don't stay away. This old boy torn and resigned, she can't talk anymore.
Interesting drum fills right there. The pattern just keeps on reinventing.
What are they trying to prove? What would they like to find?
Really emphasizing like the different like fits and starts that are going on in these verses.
Back to find no signs. These pieces are broken.
Andy Clark on keyboards, fresh off of his time with Bill Nelson, with whom he played between 1976 and 1979. Yeah, Andy Clark joined Be-Bop Deluxe for the Sunburst Finish album, and then he played on that Modern Music and the phenomenal Drastic Plastic, which was released in 1978. One of the forerunners of like new romantic, cold wave, 80s art rock. As a matter of fact, Drastic Plastic could be viewed as somewhat of an influence on this album, as it influenced a lot of music that came out in the early 80s. And finally played with Bill, was the only other Be-Bop member to follow Bill into the Red Noise project, which put out one album, Sound on Sound, in 1979. And this seems to be the final destination as far as rock releases go. I'll have to check on that. And I think he put out some library albums in the early 80s. But then again, there's been a confusion for a long time between Andy Clark with a C and Andy Clark with a K. And because there was the other Andy Clark who was in the Raw band, I believe. Yeah. And was in Up. And was in Hutchinson. Go back to the song for now.
These pieces are broken because you're young. You'll be the strangest of night because you're young. What could be nicer for you?
I love how the backup vocals are emphasizing sevenths. Like when it goes from when it lands on A minor, they're going ooh, and they're like holding that G, like because you have G and C. G is the fifth in C, But there's no G in A minor unless you throw in a seventh. And yet they hold that G the whole time, so they add kind of nuance to these chords as the chord sequence progresses. He's doing that really pained, melodramatic, almost operatic type vocalizing that he had been doing at least since Rock and Roll Suicide, and especially on 1984. But he's like taking it to a new level. All this wavering and his gymnastics are quite. He's really developed as a vocalist since like the mid 70s. That riff stays the same, but the bass note underneath it changes. It like goes from like E, C, E.
He promised his heart was loving her such a crime.
So many fits and starts in the rhythmic compartment there.
Nothing really out of his mind.
Must have been pretty hard to put together. I know that they were recording these like in different takes and everything separately, but just getting that pacing out that rhythmic structure underneath these verses, it's just it's not very intuitive at all. Someone who's really thinking about how can we build a lot of tension and almost like rhythmic confusion here.
This is so unhappy.
I had never noticed before how complex these verses were, both rhythmically, harmonically, and the way that Bowie sings, the way he interjects with syllables. One thing that really gives this song its kind of like ebb and flow is that these more kind of rolling passages are interspersed with those passages that are very rhythmically oblique.
These pieces are broken because you're young.
That ooh, that really slays me. And I love those cascading like bright light keyboards. They're playing like arpeggios right over this.
What could be nicer for you and it'll make me sad. So I'll dance
catch up with the lyrics here. Let's see. I should start from the beginning. Psychodelicate girl, come out to play. Little metal-faced boy, don't stay away. They're so war-torn and resigned. She can't talk anymore. What are they trying to prove? What would they like to find? It's love back to front and no sides. Like I say, these pieces are broken. That's a telling line. These pieces are broken because these lyrics were quite fragmentary up until now. I'm piecing together that this is about confused, directionless youth with shattered idealism from broken environments, broken post-war, and that's what's immediately coming to mind anyway. These pieces are broken. Hope I'm wrong, but I know. So Bowie hopes that there's more to it than what he's seeing, but on a gut level, he thinks he's called it already. Because you're young, you'll meet a stranger some night. Because you're young, what could be nicer for you? And it makes me sad, so I'll dance my life away. A million dreams, a million scars. So he thinks that these young people are going to meet the wrong people, and it's going to be downhill from there. And there's nothing he can really do to stop it, because it's just a rite of passage for most people, and most people don't really emerge on the finer side of life in the end. Most people go wrong in some way, and so all he can do is like try and prevent himself from thinking about it. A million dreams, a million scars. He punishes hard. Was loving her such a crime? She took back everything she said, left him nearly out of his mind. Okay, the story of the woman who kind of loses it, and despite her boyfriend trying to do everything for her. They're people I know, people I love. They seem so unhappy, dead or alive. This could be people where at least one of the couples where at least one of the partners becomes addicted to drugs and chooses drugs over the loved one. It's love back to front and no sides. That is a very convoluted line. That's in a real choice moment where I can just feel the oblique rhythmic structure playing against those lyrics. It's love back to front and no sides. Like I say, these pieces are broken. Like I say, these pieces are broken. And these lyrics are so fragmentary, and it's like a cracked mirror. Hope I'm walking, but I know. Because you're young, you'll meet a stranger some night. Because you're young, what could be nicer for you? And it makes me sad, so I'll dance my life away. A million dreams, a million scars. He sings that out to the end. I can't really hear Pete Townshend at this point. I'm hearing like bass, I'm hearing layered vocals, I'm hearing some icy keyboards from Andy Clark. Okay, yeah, I do hear some thin, ringing lines from Pete Townshend coming out of this speaker. Yeah, one of the finest, most catchy, most gripping album tracks off of Scary Monsters and Super Creeps, the 1980 release by David Bowie, rounding out kind of his avant-garde proto-new wave phase. I say proto because he was a forerunner to new wave, but he was very much an influence on the New Romantic movement, which exploded in 1980. And the New Romantic movement was a complete restructuring of the principles of art rock. During the 1970s, art rock, as it came to be known, through the symphonic progressive and symphonic orchestral pop acts, tended to marry the maximalism of mid to late era Beatles with elements of Renaissance, Baroque, classical, and folk music. So it was like taking the present, like the 1960s, late 60s, early 70s, and marrying it to elements of art, literature, and instrumentation that harken back to like the 18th, 17th, and even 16th century. And you know, there were bands that had kind of the Tudorian fixations. There were bands that were more oriented towards like 19th century romanticism. There were bands harkening back to there were bands harkening back to the Middle Ages. And with the New Romantic movement, they dispensed with pre-20th century aesthetics and focused more on post-Great War Dadaism, Futurism, and the romanticism of the film noir romantic or of classic Hollywood, like film noir of the 1940s, French New Wave of the early 1960s, futuristic concepts borrowed from like 1930s movies like Things to Come, or the 1926 movie Metropolis. So it was basically a mixture of 20th century modernism and futurism. Yeah, that was the new art rock template, as bested by the New Romantics, who took like lavish styles, paired them with icy, futuristic, electronic arrangements. And Bowie became like the honorary godfather of it all, because they drew from like his lyricism stretching back like to the early 70s, drawn from like tracks like 5 Years, Starman, and through albums like Diamond Dogs, you know, with tracks like 1984 and that pained vocals, through the refinery and like ivory laden elegance of tracks like Aladdin Sane, and onward to the glacial, trebly isolationism of the Low album. And so he was right at home in 1980, Bowie, you know, riding the wave, you know. And one of his most avant-garde singles ever, the very obliquely structured Ashes to Ashes, became a #1 single in the UK. I mean, can you believe that a song that oblique in its structure, I mean, just throwing around these awkward like bass lines and weird sounds just at odd angles. It's just a bunch of jerks and spasms and odd registered vocals, like in this strange kind of falsetto at times, and lyrics that are quite oblique in and of themselves. Like, can you imagine a song that weird, even by an artist with the name recognition of Bowie, could make it to #1 on any chart? I mean, and so, let's see, Andy Clark, yeah, I was questioning, what did he do after this that can be accurately traced to him and not confusingly to the other Andy Clark? He was the one who did the library music albums on KPM. Yeah, so it is him and not the other Andy Clark who did that 1982 library album that has some really great tracks, including an instrumental version of Ultravox's Vienna. It has like the bass sequence of it, that boom, 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 boom. He does like a library instrumental of that with the lyrics taken out. And Pete Townshend just was glad to help an old friend on loan, between, like, just kind of a gun for hire, just after he had put out Empty Glass. And I really liked that he was creative on this track and really lent something and gave it kind of an earworm, a catchy, like, rhythm guitar ringing figure that recurs throughout this piece, because on Face Dances, on the 2 John Entwistle compositions on there, it's like he's just phoning it in. He is just so unimpassioned on those John Entwistle numbers. But then, again, he tended to be that way with the John Entwistle songs. He just didn't have any feel for Entwistle's material and couldn't really add anything. give it anything to enhance the track, and would just be, and he would tended to be really rote on those numbers. The Quiet One and You, I guess. And it's not like those were bad songs. They were good songs. I mean, John Entwistle put out his best solo album that year, Too Late to Hero. Arguably a stronger album than Face Dances. And because on that album, Entwistle, the Ox, was working with Joe Walsh. And Joe Walsh, of course, was a big fan of Entwistle, really looked up to Entwistle, was just in awe, was honored to be playing on his album. And he really went the extra mile and found nuances to add to each song. He was really feeling Entwistle's material. But I guess we could not really expect Townshend to be looking up to Entwistle, because he's known Entwistle since the two of them were, I guess, like 16, 17 years old. Anyway, and let's see, who else played on this track before I wrap it up here? I kind of lost the page. Oh, anyway, let me see what this is about. According to Genius.com, there are a couple of blurbs here. Because You're Young describes a relationship between two young people from an older, more cynical man's perspective. That's interesting. And there's a picture here of George O'Dowd, and I think Jeremy Healy of Heisey Fantasy. Yeah, George O'Dowd during his Blitz Club days before he became Lieutenant Lush, and several years before he became Boy George. It is likely an allusion for Bowie's contemporary attitude about young troublemakers, particularly those involved in the new romantic fashion movements of the early 1980s. I wonder what that was supposed to mean, because Bowie... I don't think that this person must not be aware that Bowie had a close relationship to that scene. He visited them. Steve Strange appears in the video to Ashes to Ashes. Yeah, Bowie maintained a relationship with the New Romantic movement, and he had Lee Bowery and Klaus Nomi back him up on his appearance on Saturday Night Live in late 1979. So Bowie walked among them. Bowie loved it. He loved the fashions. He dressed up himself, donned that clown get up in the Ashes to Ashes video, and he's wearing some really flamboyant outfits on the front and back cover of the Scary Monsters album. So he walked among them. He was part of the zeitgeist, and they embraced him, and it was just a match made in heaven. And this album synchronized with the track, to quote Ultravox. Anyway, for more rubies and sapphires from the Scary Monsters album and from all the other Bowie albums, see the directory of albums by English D artists in the links below. Get all the Bowie albums from 1967 up through 1987, and a few of the ones beyond that. He had a good comeback in the 2000s, the early 2000s. And 4 other D artists like Duncan Brown, Duran Duran, Deaf School, Deep Purple, Dire Straits, Dusty Springfield, Doctors of Madness, Did I say them already? The Damned. Yeah, and on and on and on. So many great English D artists. And like and subscribe and comment if there are any observations you would like to add to all this, if you think there's a point that I may have missed, if you have a different interpretation of the lyrics and such, if you noticed anything. What were your favorite little nuances or details of the song? And until next time, this is Zaragon, the world's most ear-traveled tri-maximalist, signing off.